Suppose you are looking to buy a car and you have to choose between brand A and brand B. You went through research about that, both the companies and both the cars. And through research, you found that a good number of respondents like brand A. And you decide to buy that. You're taking the decision, you're going to the dealership the next day. In the previous evening, you go to a party, you meet a friend and say, I'm thinking of planning to buy brand A. And that person says, are you crazy? The person is alarmed at your choice. And he says, my brother-in-law bought this car and half of the time it was in garage. He had to incur so much costs on it and ultimately had to sell it for junk. Now, suddenly that opinion starts weighing on your decision more.
So, Nimesh, we live in a day and age where we're all bombarded with so much data, right? How does one go about handling this data then?
Well, apparently we are not very good at handling so much data, and you are right. Through notifications, email alerts, or messages, we are continuously bombarded with something or the other. We enjoy getting a lot of this data, but in terms of decision making, it really doesn't help. I'm reminded of a poem that we used to have in school, that 6 blind men and an elephant. Talks about 6 blind men from the Indian subcontinent, and they haven't seen an elephant or met with an elephant before. So when they actually come across one, they try to touch the elephant and try to understand what elephant is. And each blind man touches a different part of the elephant and thinks the elephant is like that. So one guy would touch the leg of the elephant and feel that, it's like a tree. And all these men then start quarreling between themselves because each one has a different experience and different data point. And they are confident that I have a lot more than the other guy has. And then they start arguing over it. So sometimes we do the same thing when taking decisions. There has not been a day where you don't get any information about, say, a customer survey, supplier survey of people, management commentary. There's always some odd person who will say, I know someone who said, those kinds of information keep coming in. It feels good to collect that information, but we are not good at handling how to use that information in decision making. Sometimes we get too biased on one side or the other while taking the decisions. So we have to be careful on that.
Right. Okay. What are some of the most common errors that people tend to make while handling data?
The most common mistake or error that people make is people are not able to distinguish between the strength of a signal and the weight of the signal. Suppose we are testing a hypothesis that a coin that we are tossing is, say, biased towards heads, and that's our hypothesis. The number of times we toss the coin actually determines the weight of the data, the sample size. And number of times the head comes is the strength of the data. So strength shows the extremity of the signal, and weight shows the predictive validity of the test that we are doing. Now, suppose in this festive season, I want to check or gather some data through surveys about how this festive season has been in India. Suppose I call up 3 large retailers, consumer durable vendors, and ask them, how was the festive season this year compared to last year? And 2 of them say, it was extremely good. And so that is validating my hypothesis that, this year festive season is good. The strength is very good, but the weight of the data is not very good because I called up only 3 people out of it. Now, instead of that, suppose I call up 33 different large retail chains, and 19 of them say that, this year was very good in terms of festive season. That is more important for my decision making, because though the strength looks less, 19 out of 33, the predictive validity or the weight of the data is better. Many a times, driven by the strength or the extremity of the signal that we are getting, we become overconfident and we take the wrong judgment. So I believe the most common error is that people don't really understand the strength and the weight of the information that they are getting.
Understood. Nimesh, what are the most common biases that tend to creep in when one is handling data?
When we are handling data and using our judgment, typically there are a few common biases that come in.
Okay.
First of all is, say, ignoring base rates. Now let's take the example of the festive season,
Okay.
and that Q3 is like booming in India.
Right.
Now you go and visit certain, say, property developers, and you see that there is no construction work happening, and you start worrying that is the economic activity going down, or these companies are not doing well. Now typically during, say, Diwali or such festivals, there may be certain workers which actually migrate back to their villages to be with their families or so sometimes.
Right.
So that seasonality needs to be factored in when you are analyzing the new inputs or new data that has come in. So many times people ignore that base rate.
Okay.
Many sectors, like for example, cement has a certain seasonality or a dip during monsoons.
Right.
If you don't understand that seasonality, don't understand that long-term cycle or base rate, you may actually jump to a wrong conclusion about how that season is going or how the hypothesis is playing out.
All right.
The second part is when we are collecting data, the information which we get firsthand, we tend to give it more weight than
Right.
what we read about or from a secondary source.
Right.
I personally visited a shop. I personally visited a certain, say, car dealership. I personally visited a certain company, and I got this input. Now, those become treasures for us to guard rather than hypothesis to be tested. Then whatever secondary data comes, we tend to argue against it. Cognitive dissonance sets in and all that. So we need to be careful of that. Third and important part is that we are influenced by anecdotes and narratives more than by numbers.
Okay.
So there was this experiment done by psychologists where, say, people were told to choose between brand A and brand B.
Okay.
And they found that when people hear anecdotes, they respond more to it than numbers.
Okay.
Suppose you are looking to buy a car and you have to choose between brand A and brand B. You went through research about that, both the companies and both the cars. And through research, you found that a good number of respondents like brand A, and you decide to buy that. You're taking the decision, you're going to the dealership the next day. In the previous evening, you go to a party, you meet a friend and say, I'm thinking of planning to buy brand A. And that person says, oh, are you crazy? The person is alarmed at your choice. And he says, my brother-in-law bought this car and half of the time it was in garage. He had to incur so much costs on it and ultimately had to sell it for junk. Now, suddenly that opinion starts weighing on your decision more. Ideally, what people should be doing is that there are so many customers who are happy about this brand. You came across one of them who was unhappy about it. So it should change your probability or decision making slightly. It should not really impact it so much. But anecdotes tend to impact us more. And the lastly, availability bias, something that we have discussed earlier, that events or data that are very vivid, they are very memorable, we tend to give it more weightage then, and they may be less probable, but we tend to give them more weightage than the data which is not very exciting, but gives you more better probability of occurrence.
Got it. All right. So finally, then, what are the 2 to 3 important things that one should keep in mind while handling data?
We spend a lot of time and effort in organizing and collecting data.
Right.
So there are 2-3 things we should do to help us use this data and reach a better judgment.
Okay.
First, use the right sample size. Don't make it too small. Otherwise, even if you get a strong signal from there, it may not be representative of the whole universe that you are really trying to estimate. Second is determine and anchor on the right base rates. Here, you have to look at long-term trends and then analyze which are the base rates, and you anchor on them, and then you can adjust from there on. Last point is that you have to try and have a process that uses that data in an unbiased manner. So have a nice statistical model to analyze this data where you reduce your personal biases from coming into your judgment. So that's how you do it.
Right.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risk. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.